The debt bubble in Canada has reached unprecedented heights, and the corruption in the Canadian government and in institutions in Canada is undeniable now, and we are faced with the reality of a depression here in Canada. And I am not over exaggerating when I use the word depression. I mean, right now, guys, we are in a recession. Whether you want to believe that or not, or you're waiting for the government to come and tell you, is entirely up to you. But the reality is we are heading into an absolute depression. What we are seeing in Canada is Canadians can't even afford to feed themselves, let alone service their unbelievable amounts of debt. What we have seen is a debt bubble that has been fueled by housing and real estate, and basically it has been leveraged to the absolute maximum. Now, if you zoom out from Canada, you begin to learn that it's not all the economies in the world that are leveraged. Different economies are leveraged in different ways. Some economies have took it to the extreme where it is the everything bubble, like Canada. Other economies have extreme leverage in government debt. Other economies have extreme leverage in the private sector. Here in Canada, we have extreme leverage in government debt. We have extreme leverage when it comes to households, and we have extreme leverage when it comes to private businesses. So when you think about private businesses in Canada, a lot of them are in debt. They're in massive amounts of debt. And who owns these private businesses? It's oligarchs. It's the people who are in positions of power and can influence governments. These are people that go to these clubs and they have friends and they all know each other and they all call each other. I mean, do you think it's a coincidence that WestJet announced that it was increasing its baggage prices literally at the same time as Air Canada? Do you think that was a coincidence, or do you think that happened for a reason, because maybe those two CEOs of those airlines actually talk? You see, the problem is when debt bubbles get to the extent that you have in Canada, it's possible that corruption can become rife throughout the system, because people in positions of power see that they can use that to an advantage to essentially gain more wealth, which equals more power when it comes to a desperate economy that is pinned on leverage. The thing is, there are economies around the world that aren't leveraged at all, where you can go out and buy a business in cash and you don't actually need to take out a massive amount of debt. I've seen those businesses myself in Colombia. But the thing is, the amount of debt now in the system has brought it to the breaking point that we're at right now, where people can't afford to pay their mortgage. Mortgage delinquency rates, according to Equifax, skyrocketed in the last quarter of 2023. And think about it, guys, we're talking about that report came out in March of 2024, nearly 3 months later. So that's not exactly a quick report that we got on that. You're seeing lawyers in Calgary come out and say that there is a skyrocketing amount of foreclosures and a backlog, the biggest amount that he has ever seen since 2008.
A Calgary foreclosure lawyer says the number of people facing legal action over missed mortgage payments is way up and rising. Alyssa Carpenter joins us now live.
Linda, Steve Dimmick calls the numbers alarming. He says we haven't seen numbers this high in terms of foreclosure action in about 15 years.
So, you know, and that's in a housing market that is currently going up. So what do you think is going to happen to all these people who are now bag holding this real estate that they bought at peak bubble prices? The thing is, these debt bubbles go on as long as they can sustain themselves and grow bigger, and as long as that debt just keeps being pumped into the system. This is why Canadian banks have done the absolute maximum that they can do to lend you money. I mean, they are practically giving it away. If you have a good credit score, you can lend against any type of asset. You can lend against your retirement portfolio with an RRSP loan. And I've heard from insiders on this channel who work in the banks who were pressured by upper management to actually enforce this on seniors that were vulnerable, to take advantage of them and get them into debt. Hey, what's that, Bill? You can get an RRSP loan. You can go out and buy an investment property. Now is a great time to do that. Interest rates are at historic lows. Do you remember that, guys? Interest rates are at historic lows, and now they're at historic highs, at least highs for the past 20 years. But when you look at interest rates over the past 50, 60, 100 years, and you actually zoom out, you realize where we are with interest rates right now is scarily normal. It's not actually high. lie like you're being told. You see, the central planners like the Bank of Canada and the Federal Reserve, they want to come out and say, you know what, guys, we have our monetary policy tight right now. But the reality is far from that. I mean, when you really think about what is going on with monetary policy, you have to think about inflation. And inflation has become a complete lie as well. And that brings me on to the next things. The institutions that we rely on for data are entirely corrupt and are entirely biased. And they're also part of the government. So how can they be trusted when the government is this corrupt? I mean, we have seen the influence that China has had on Canada and has been exposed over the past couple of months. And it's unbelievable the corruption that is going on in Canada. So to sit there and say, you know what, we're actually a really nice Western country here, we don't have any problems with institutional corruption, is a complete laugh. And when you look at the unemployment numbers and when you look at the CPI, you realize that those numbers have been fake for a very, very long time. And that might actually be the problem. That might actually be the root cause. You see, who really cares when you tell somebody about inflation? A lot of you might switch off this video right now and think, boring, I don't want to hear about it. But the thing is, inflation influences monetary policy, and we've seen interest rates that have been way too low for too long, and that's been part of the problem. You see, what happens is when you leverage an economy, basically the economy then becomes what's needed to sustain the leverage. It's kind of funny when you really think about it, but it's actually not that complex when you think about it also, because guess what? If the government comes out with bailouts all the time, then the economy can continue to go along. But the problem is that cannot be sustained forever. You're not going to see that happen, and it's just going to continue forever. The government can't continue to just pump money indefinitely into the economy without having consequences, because you see, what happens is people build up moral hazard. A moral hazard is one of the things that gets built up, and it's one of those things that a lot of people don't understand or don't even notice. And with the amount of moral hazard that you've now seen being built up within the banking system, within governments, within institutions, it means that they basically rely and know that they're going to get bailouts. They're too big to fail, essentially. And because of that, they take even more extreme risks, which then makes the boom bust cycle even more extreme, which is what we're beginning to see happen right now. And the thing is, like I said, when the government comes in and bails it out, or the Federal Reserve or the Bank of Canada, that doesn't mean it's free money. That doesn't mean that money is created without consequences. It has consequences, and those consequences are always going to be one of inflation. Now, depending on where that money goes, it can be less or more inflationary. When you see direct transfer payments, when you see people able to get forbearance, not have to pay their loans, not have to pay their mortgage, of course, do those people save that money? Well, they save a little bit of it, but the reality is it creates so much inflation, they end up spending back those savings. So it's kind of crazy, the loop that we're in right now, but it's easy to see how we got here. And the corruption that is now evident, the handshakes behind closed doors at places like the World Economic Forum are becoming evident that they're corrupting society. And these elite figures, these politicians, these central planners, these parties that we have, conservatives and liberals, NDP, they're not going to do anything about that. Their main goal and objective is maintain the status quo, is leading their political pie. It's not necessarily actually leading the country. It's not necessarily leading you. So I wouldn't believe any of them. I would treat them all and say, you know what, I'm going to see what happens. I want to thank you for watching this video. If you've enjoyed this video, you might like this video here. And if you're looking for a VPN to get around all the censorship laws in Canada, go to expressvpn.com/marketmania. That includes Bill C-11. Anyway, guys, I will see you in the next one. Take care.